Welcome to LawWorks, your monthly law magazine show where we will discuss law-related issues and news and information that you can use. My name is Daryl Crosthwaite.
Welcome to LawWorks. I'm attorney Mike Weber. On today's show, we're going to start with the Law News Docket, where we present current law-related stories and events. On today's show, my co-host Daryl will discuss the recent events in the NFL and the lawsuits regarding concussions and head injuries.
The Guest Docket will feature monthly guests with a different focus on several law-related topics. This month, I'm going to interview my co-host Mike to answer some questions regarding representation of injured workers in the state of Ohio.
And next will be our FAQ docket, which features frequently asked questions on different subjects. This month, I'm going to be answering frequently asked questions about workers' compensation law.
And on our What Should You Do docket, I will talk about liability-related issues to children's sports and precautions that you can take to avoid injuries when your child is involved in organized sports. Please stay tuned for our second docket, our Law News docket.
Welcome to the Law News Docket, the part of the show where we review law-related stories that are in the news. On today's docket, my co-host Daryl is going to discuss the recent lawsuits in the NFL regarding head injuries and concussions.
Thanks, Mike. Here's some background information about concussions in the NFL. Reports show an increasing number of retired NFL players who have suffered concussions and developed memory and cognitive issues, such as dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, and what they call chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or a CTE in the medical field. A concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury and can be caused by a blow to the body or a blow to the head. As a college football official, I'm very familiar with concussions, and I've also seen it in other sports such as soccer and even cheerleading. Concussion facts: most concussions occur without losing consciousness. Some examples of the symptoms that people exhibit when they have concussions include imbalance, headaches, confusion, memory loss, loss of consciousness, vision change, hearing change, mood change, fatigue, and malaise. Among the plaintiffs in the concussion-related lawsuit include many names that we're familiar with: Art Monk, Tony Dorsett, Jim McMahon, Jamal Anderson, and Ray Easterling. Most recently, in May of 2014, it was reported that Dan Marino, the former quarterback with the Miami Dolphins, had withdrawn his name from the concussion lawsuit that was filed this past May 28th. That lawsuit claims that the NFL knew for years of the link between concussions and long-term health issues. Here are some recent statistics related to concussions in the NFL. In 2012, 261 concussions were diagnosed during the preseason and regular season practices and games combined. In 2013, the number of diagnosed concussions dropped a bit to 228. Again, those were in preseason and regular season practices and games.
You know, Daryl, one of the things that I think a lot of people are concerned about here is not only how many have been diagnosed, but how many have gone undiagnosed, or how many subconcussive impacts these players have had on a repetitive and regular basis.
Well, and the other thing too, Mike, is how many weren't diagnosed? You know, how many players ignored it, were afraid to say anything about concussions, and more importantly, how many coaches ignored the signs and symptoms related to a concussion. That's the problem we have with regard to concussions these days, is that we have to change the culture regarding concussions.
What was it that started the whole concern about the concussions in the long-term brain sequela?
Well, in 2002, Dr. Bennett Amalu, a forensic pathologist and co-founder of the Brain Injury Research Institute, identified the CTE, the brain injury, in the brain of former Pittsburgh Steeler Mike Webster. Unfortunately, Mr. Webster was 50 years old. He was a phenomenal professional college football player, but he committed suicide. So his death really started the trend to look at these type of brain injuries. And Dr. Amalu is the first to identify the CTE in American football players. Other players who have been diagnosed with CTE and committed suicide, again, a lot of these names are very, very familiar. Pittsburgh Steeler Terry Long, Andre Waters, former Chicago Bears defensive back Dave Duerson, former Atlanta Falcons safety Ray Easterling, former NFL linebacker Junior Seau. And Cincinnati has not escaped the problems regarding concussions. Unfortunately, Mr. Ryan Friel, and I believe everybody remembered Mr. Friel. Ryan was a great utility player for the Cincinnati Reds. Unfortunately, he committed suicide at the age of 36 in December of 2012. He was diagnosed with having CTE. So, it is very prevalent these days, and people are making a concerted effort to really kind of change the culture with regard to identifying concussions and getting treatment and trying to get the prevention and treatment early so that you don't have these type of problems.
Yeah, losing these type of players is tragic, and I think people have expressed concerns about the CTE leading to other medical conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and a host of other problems.
In last August, in 2013, the NFL and the ex-players reached a deal in the class action lawsuit to pay $765 million to fund expenses, concussion-related medical compensation. Unfortunately, that lawsuit was not, it was declined. It was by a judge in Philadelphia for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania because she didn't believe it was enough money. Apparently, the NFL on June 25th made an additional offer to fund the research, but it's going to be over a 65-year life of the settlement.
As a college football referee who has much experience and much contact with this sport, what changes do you see occurring today?
You see it a lot at the high school level. You see it a lot at the college level. I think that's why there's a concerted effort. Unfortunately, I believe that a lot of these gentlemen that suffered these traumatic brain injuries, I'll guarantee you, I know that they probably had these injuries when they were in playing professional sports, but I can almost guarantee that they experienced an equal number of those concussions playing high school sports and college sports. That's why you see a concerted effort for the National Federation of High School Sports and ENCAA and the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta to address concussions so they can treat it, identify it, so that it doesn't rise to the level of the CTE.
What do you think is going to make this work?
I think that you have to, again, change the culture. You have to change the culture of the players, the coaches, and the parents. People can't be afraid to say they got a concussion. The parents can't be afraid to let their child sit out, and coaches have to, step up and man up and say, you can't play because you have concussion-related syndrome.
Daryl, thank you very much. That was very informative. If you'd like to weigh in on today's news docket, go to our Facebook page called Cincinnati Law Works. Like us and follow us to get updates for future shows. Stay tuned. We've got some good information on workers' comp coming up.
Welcome to our guest docket. Today I'm going to be interviewing my co-host Mike Weber, local attorney in Cincinnati who specializes in representing injured workers in the state of Ohio. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what caused you or why'd you get into representing injured workers?
Well, my dad, Don Weber, who is 82 years old and still practices full-time, started practicing law back in 1961. So I was born in 64, so it was part of the household for my whole life, and I don't think I really ever had much of a choice other than to be an attorney.
Now, where'd you go to law school? Where'd you go to college?
Well, I went to undergrad college at Case Western Reserve University. I got out of there in 1986. Then I went to George Washington University up in Washington, D.C., left there in 1989. Have been here. I started with the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office to get a couple years of trials, and then I've been on my own since the early 90s.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were a college football player, is that correct?
Yeah, we had 4 real good years playing college football. I had a 3-day NFL career, but that obviously didn't work out all that great, so I'm back being an attorney.
3 more days than most people, right?
Yeah.
Mike, what is workers' compensation?
Workers' compensation is insurance that is provided normally through the state of Ohio to an employer, and it covers injured workers who have suffered injuries on the job.
Are there different types of workers' compensation claims with regard to employers?
You know, the majority, I would say 80% of the employers get their insurance through the state of Ohio, the BWC, and they're called state-funded employers. The majority of the remainder are what's called self-insured employers. Those are the bigger employers that provide the insurance themselves. There's also a thing called PE employers, which are public employees like the counties and the cities, and there's also non-compliant employers, which are employers that don't have workers' comp, but regardless, they all fall and are governed by the same statutes and codes.
What type of injuries are covered under Ohio workers' compensation law?
You know, any type of injury that occurs on the job. The legal term is within the course and scope of the employment. If you think about it, there are an area where you're not in the course and scope, there's a gray area, and there's a black area where you clearly are on the job. If you're on the job and, you know, the safe falls off the shelf and lands on your foot, most likely there's no question about coverage there. Whereas if you're in your driveway and getting into your car and heading into the office and slip and fall in your own driveway, you know, you don't have workers' comp coverage there. You do get into some gray areas. A good example is when you're parking your car in the employer's parking lot. You know, the questions that we see a lot of times are, is there coverage for that situation? So the question is, are you within the course and scope of the employment? And if you are, you have workers' comp.
What are occupational diseases?
Occupational diseases there's a variety of them, but basically, you know, for exposure to chemicals is a good example of an occupational disease. They have scheduled and they have non-scheduled conditions. Anything that's really not, I guess, best described as trauma-related can fall under the occupational disease.
What does a person do if they are hurt in a job?
You know, the most important thing is to document the injury. If you get hurt on the job, you want to promptly report it to your employer. And you also want to put something in writing. Don't just tell somebody, you ask them for an incident report, you fill out that incident report, because that'll protect you as you go down the road. The next thing you want to do is you want to see a workers' compensation doctor promptly. And when you talk to that doctor, you have to explain to him that it is a work-related injury. And because the documentation comes back later on, it's very, very important that shows how you hurt yourself. The other thing that's important when you meet with a doctor is that you tell them every body part that has been hurt. So if you hurt your neck and your shoulder and your mid-back, you want to be sure that you describe that to your doctor. The next thing is you want to keep good records, you want to document everything, and as the injured worker, even though sometimes the hospital or your doctor will fill out and file an application for you, it's your responsibility to be sure that, you know, you have a claim with the Ohio BWC. So you need to check and do whatever is necessary to get a claim file and then to get a claim number. You know, once you get a claim file and a claim number, the processing of that claim starts, and you will ultimately get a response, you know, as to what's been approved, what may not be approved from the BWC.
Now, are there exceptions to workers' compensation coverage? I mean, are all claims covered? I mean, like independent contractors, if I'm playing softball for the team, my employer's softball team, are things like that covered?
You know, I've been doing this now for 25 years, and there are so many gray areas, and I'm sure you can agree with me on that, you know, the question is first is, are you an employee? Because as you said, if you're an independent contractor, you're your own little business and you're in there to perform a service for another business, and that's not a workers' comp situation where you're going to have any coverage. You know, you can have recreational activities where you may or may not have coverage. The employer can have you sign waivers that say that, you know, hey, we're not going to give you workers' comp coverage if you get hurt at the employee picnic. So, you know, again, it gets back to, are you an employee? And, you know, was this within the course and scope of your employment?
What if the injury that occurred was the injured worker's fault?
You know, that's a good question because a lot of people ask that. Fault plays no role. And that goes both directions. If the injured worker trips over his own 2 feet while he's in the course and scope of employment, falls down the steps, knocks over the ladder and it lands on his head, there is still coverage. That being said, if the employer is negligent and negligently leaves a broom in the middle of the floor and next to a shovel that's next to a rake and he trips over all 3 and hurts himself, then you can't go after the employer for negligence, but you do get full coverage under the workers' comp. So really in either direction, fault or negligence on either party's part really plays no role.
What if the employer files bankruptcy?
If an employer goes out of business, the state of Ohio protects you. Okay, so you would just become covered through the state. The employer would play no role.
What happens after the injury?
After the injury, you're going to file with Workman's Comp, you're going to get a claim number, and then the Bureau will process that claim. They'll talk to the employer, they'll get all of your medical records, they'll ask you to get medical records, incident reports, whatever. The Bureau will review it and they'll make a decision whether or not that claim is going to be approved. Now, the most important thing is just because the Bureau says that the claim is not going to be approved, that you have the right to appeal. Because they may not have all the information, they may not understand, they may not have talked to you in detail about what happened. So you will get either an approval or a denial from the BWC. If you get an approval, yes, that's good. But if you get anything denied, you want to be really careful because you have appeal rights, and most likely you'll want to appeal anything that's denied.
What if your claim is denied by Workers' Comp or the Industrial Commission of Ohio? Do you have any recourse at that point?
Well, once the BWC makes a decision and denies something, the case is referred to the Industrial Commission, which is where they actually have hearings. Once you get in front of the administrative law judges, they're the people that are making the first level of important decisions after the BWC. They will either approve or deny, or some combination thereof, your claim. And ultimately, though, you have the right to appeal what's called a right to participate, which is the allowance of a claim or conditions in a claim. You can appeal that out of the Industrial Commission, actually appeal it as far as going to court in the Court of Common Pleas in the state of Ohio.
How do I find a doctor? I'm an injured worker, I don't feel good, I hurt. How do I find a doctor to treat me for my industrial injuries?
The most important thing is you have to find a doctor that takes workers' compensation, and you have to find a doctor that wants to take workers' compensation, because workers' comp requires effort on the part of the doctors. They have to support somebody who gets hurt on the job, and if they don't want to step up and do what's necessary to help you with your workers' comp, you really should be looking for other doctors. If you have a workers' comp case, you need them to write and document why treatment is necessary, why you need to amend the claim to go from, say, a lumbar sprain to a herniated disc that's showing up on the MRI. So that doctor has to be able to really help out. It has to be supportive. And they also have to be workers' comp certified.
Please stay tuned for our fourth docket, frequently asked questions about workers' compensation.
Hi, welcome to the FAQ docket, where we cover some frequently asked questions. On today's show, I'm going to answer some questions about workers' compensation law. First question I get a lot from clients are, if I file a workers' compensation claim, can I get fired? The answer to that is you are protected by both federal and state statutes. Employers are not allowed to discriminate against you and cannot terminate your position because of the workers' compensation claim. That being said, you have to be smart if you have a work comp injury and not give them any reason to cause you a problem by showing up late or causing problems at work. But the bottom line is you are protected and they are not allowed to fire you because of a work comp claim. Now, the second question is, what happens if something gets denied in workman's comp? What you have to remember is just because a TPA, a third-party administrator, or the BWC denied something, that's their position, their opinion, but that is not binding. You have rights of appeal, and whether you file an appeal or whether you file a motion to get it down in front of a judge at the Industrial Commission who would hear that issue, you have the right to do that. So don't forget that. So if something gets denied, you definitely want to get an appeal on file in a timely manner. The third question is, what if I've got a claim that's starting to get old? Well, here's what I tell people. If you've got a workers' comp claim, you've gone through the immediate treatment, you've kind of plateaued out where you're not going to get, a whole lot better, a whole lot worse, you've got three options, and one of them is not a really good option. The first option is, if you're going to keep that claim open, you need to go to the doctor on a periodic basis. I tell my clients at a minimum every 6 to 9 months, 6 to 12 months, something like that, just to maintain documentation of continuing problems with that claim. Not to mention that you have a 5-year statute of limitations from the last time they pay any kind of a bill, a benefit, or whatever under workman's comp. So each time you go, that extends out another 5 years. So you can keep your claim open as long as you need to. But also, just as importantly, you want to continue to document that whatever your injury is, if it hasn't healed, you need the medical records to show that. Your second option, if your claim is starting to get old, is to take a look at settling the case. You can do complete and total buyout of the claim, which is a settlement, if all the parties involved agree. And that would be you, the injured worker, that would be the employer, and that would be the state of Ohio. There's different scenarios depending on the type of employer or the age of the claim. But what you look at when you settle a claim is, what are the potential future costs to whoever's paying those? And that would be what potential future medical benefits might exist, or what potential future wage benefits might be out there. So, taking a look at settlement's an option. The third option is the bad option, is if you just leave your claim sit, ultimately after 5 years, it just times out and closes out. So if you have a claim, you want to either keep it active or look at settlement. The fourth question is, can I settle my claim and avoid a trial? As I just said, claims are settlable, but they have to be agreed to by all of the parties, depending on the situation. If it's a self-insured employer or a state fund employer, how old that claim is, whether the employer is still involved, because after 5 years, an employer really no longer is involved if it's state fund in most cases. So you can always look and try to settle a claim. Not every case will reach an agreement, or not every case should settle, but it's always a possibility that's out there. Thank you very much. I look forward to Daryl in the next segment.
Welcome to What Should You Do Docket. Today I'm going to be talking about what happens if your child is injured in an organized sport. Is anyone liable for their medical cost for their injuries? Children and teens are more likely to sustain traumatic brain injuries, or what they call TBI, including concussions, and take longer to recover than adults do. Traumatic brain injury symptoms may appear mild, but the injury can lead to significant lifelong impairments affecting an individual's memory, behavior, learning, or emotions. The appropriate diagnosis, management, and education are critical for helping young athletes with a traumatic brain injury recover quickly and fully. As I indicated previously, there are several organizations right now that are really looking to help diagnose and treat and prevent concussions: the National Federation of High School Sports, the Center for Disease Control, and the NCAA. Now, each year, U.S. emergency departments treat an estimated 173,285 sports and recreation-related traumatic brain injuries, including concussions, among children and adolescents from birth to 19 years. Overall, the activities associated with the greatest number of traumatic brain injury-related emergency room visits included bicycling, football, playground activities, basketball, and soccer. National surveillance in 9 high school sports, traumatic brain injuries represent almost 9% of all injuries reported in the 9 sports. Numbers and rates are highest in football, and girls soccer is extremely high also. And as the father of 2 daughters, I can tell you for a fact that soccer players experience a lot of concussions. Matter of fact, a few years ago, my daughter's soccer team, in one season, they had 5 young ladies who had concussions and were unable to play for an extended period of time. A national survey of all sports and recreation-related injuries among all ages demonstrates that 31% occurred in a sports facility and 20% in a school facility. So, what should you do to protect yourself from costly medical bills related to these type of injuries? Here are some tips and suggestions. First of all, I know a lot of the high schools, before an athlete can engage in any interscholastic athletic activities, they have to have insurance. A lot of the injuries that athletes do cover mainly are going to be paid for by the insurance that the parents cover. Schools and organizations may also carry insurance, and that may help defray the cost if you don't have insurance or if your insurance doesn't cover a lot of those bills. So before your child gets involved in that type of activity, you might want to check your insurance as well as the insurance for the school or the athletic association. Now, sometimes parents sue school district or athletic associations claiming that the schools or the athletic associations were negligent for things like not having the proper safety equipment, not having the proper emergency care on hand at the time of the injury. You have to be very careful when it comes to suing schools because of a thing called sovereign immunity. And there are cases in the state of Ohio that talk about what you have to show for or to be able to recover against a school for sovereign immunity. For instance, there have been lawsuits brought against schools for gymnasiums that have had wet water that they knew that existed, but yet they didn't do anything to clean up the water or fix the leak. In football fields with exposed sprinkler heads. Other things where individuals, the participants are, exposed to hazards. Mm-hmm. So what should you take? What kind of precautions should you take? Well, if your child is playing sports or competing in something right now, or if he or she is thinking about trying out, you should find out the injury and statistics for that particular sport. Check with Safe Kids USA, your family doctor, and your child's coach for more information. 2, ask your insurance agent if sports-related activities are covered by your medical and health insurance. 3, ask officials at the school district or the athletic association that is sponsoring the sport if they carry insurance that will pay for the treatment if your child is injured. 4, make sure your child has all the proper safety equipment and gear. If it's not provided by the school, go out and buy it yourself. Make sure that they have the proper equipment to be able to participate. And 5, ask the coaches and staff if they are trained in emergency first aid and CPA. A lot of these schools, a lot of activities, a lot of associations have certified athletic trainers on staff that will treat injured athletes and help them through the recovery process. So if you have any questions regarding any liability issues regarding an injury that your son or daughter may have experienced, contact an attorney. Again, make sure that your insurance will cover the treatment that your child receives for the injuries, and also contact the school for any other issues regarding insurance. And again, look at the questions that you may want to ask your attorney about waivers. Should your son and daughter participate if they don't sign the waiver, if you don't sign the waiver? If your insurance doesn't pay, can you force the school to pay for it? And finally, can you sue other players of the school if she is injured? So a lot of issues there. Again, I think the best thing to do is consult an attorney in a situation like that.
Daryl, thank you very much. I want to thank you for tuning in. Remember to go to our Facebook page, Cincinnati Law Works, to find out more information about the show and to find out what we're going to have on next month. So, Daryl, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.